Good evening, everyone. We're now live streaming on YouTube, so this meeting's being recorded. And we'll start at 7.
6.
6. It was in my calendar originally for 7. And if you want to unmute yourself,
I hope it's Tom and Jerry first then for the first hour.
we'll have an interlude with ice cream as well if someone's got any.
Musical interlude. We just need somebody down the front playing on a piano or something.
Has it been sunny where everyone is?
Yes, wonderful.
It's so nice, isn't it?
Makes such a difference.
Been very wet in Devon. Been lucky.
And in Cornwall.
We're here from East Dorset Beekeeping down near Poole in Dorset, and we all got the message today about feeding hives from the health agency.
Yes, it's always a timely warning if it's been really wet or cold, isn't it, to just go and give them a heft and maybe throw some food on just to make sure they don't die of starvation, because that would be absolutely criminal. But the weather has been absolutely awful.
What's the time?
What was that, Caroline?
Oh, I just said, what's the time? It seems to have disappeared from my screen.
Oh, it is 17:56.
Oh, right.
We will start on the hour, but because I have to start the YouTube, I've got to set that running a little bit early.
Right. Gosh, is it complicated?
It's not when it works right.
Like all things to do with IT.
It just caused me a little headache because it wanted to open it in the wrong browser.
Oh,
And then when it
dear.
opened it in the right browser, it was the wrong YouTube account.
Oh my goodness, how complicated.
So, but it's only buttons, it's only back and try again with something else. So I know I can't break it by pressing buttons. I could break it by putting it out the window.
Yes.
Right, the last 3 minutes, if you want to tell us what the weather's been like where you are. There's a few more people who've come in. There's Michelle. Hello, Michelle.
It's been sunny in Doncaster. I've
Excellent.
been in my hives today, and some are hungry, but some have got 2 supers full, so you can't tell what they're going to do, can you?
No.
It all depends on the nectar flow. If it's too cold or very wet, there's not going to be much. My bees have got emptied their supers, so I've had to give them fondant. Where's my notebook?
Just a quick question. I've reached out to the NFU in our area. Do the BBKA already work with the NFU in terms of farmers and communicating our message? And apologies if you're going to raise that later.
I'm not planning to go into specifics about groups that I've contacted. This is more sort of general advice for if associations want to engage with their media. I've had a mixed reaction from the NFU. It hasn't been ideal, if I'm honest. I reached out to them on a couple of levels. I went in on the generic kind of national contact. I went in on the London headquarters contact. I messaged on Facebook and got a response. You quite often do on Facebook. And I was given the email of the I can't remember her title, but I was given an email of a specific woman. And that has reminded me actually that I got her out of office reply saying she was unavailable until the middle of April. So we are now obviously well past that. So I will email her again. It's been very difficult to get the right person. I've had a much better response from young farmers. They got back to me straight away. But yeah, the NFU has been a bit of a tough nut to crack so far. But I do have a contact now and I will email her again.
I will just say the president's been looking at how we could work with the NFU on other issues, because obviously there's the neonics as well as Asian Hornet problem. But that's still a work in progress. So we are now at 6 o'clock. Thank you all, everyone, for joining us. I'm very pleased to welcome Kirstine Thorne, our outreach worker, to speak to us tonight about media support for Asian Hornet teams. She's doing an excellent job, and I'm really interested to see this presentation along with the rest of you. So thanks for joining us. Over to you, Kirstine.
Thank you. Hi everybody. Thank you for joining tonight. It's lovely to be able to put some faces to some voices that I've had quite a lot of telephone conversations with. I can see some smirks already. So yeah, it's nice to be able to put some faces to voices. So basically a little bit about me and what I think I can help you with tonight. Before taking on this last year, I worked for about 25 years in BBC Local, predominantly BBC Local Radio. So I was a producer, did a bit of sort of journalism and a presenter. And I also spent a little bit of time working in television as well as a subtitler, but I worked in what we call the regional hub. So the TV, the radio and the digital journalism teams were all based in the same building. So even though I didn't do a huge amount of work in digital or television, I was around them a lot. So picked up a lot on their working practices. So this is purely to kind of share with you some of my experiences and what I kind of learned along the way about what would make an engaging story, the kind of stories that would appeal to us and that we would want to put out on air, and just a few hints and tips about how to get the media's attention if you do want to engage with your media on a local level, and just a few details about sort of things to watch out for. I'll touch on kind of image copyright, things about social media and the Fifth Estate and that kind of thing. So that's my background. I do not profess to be a huge knowledge on every aspect of the media. I don't have any experience of working in print journalism. I do now have experience of dealing with print journalists. But I can sort of talk about what I know from my perspective and my working practices in the past. And we do have a communications team with people who do have quite a lot of vast journalistic experience. So if there's anything that I can't cover or answer in this talk tonight, then just if you've got any questions in the future about something you're not sure about, or the best way to go about something, or you've managed to have some success with some media engagement and you're not quite sure where to take it, just get in touch with us. There'll be somebody who can help and offer a bit of advice.
Hi, Brian.
So, and I will take some questions at the end. So if anybody wants to ask anything, but I'll whiz through things now. So let's start with the really obvious. different forms of media. So these are outlining, and there won't be anything here that people don't already know, but it's worth going over because there is such a huge variety of different these days. And I think the trick with racing Asian Hornet is going to be identifying the best platforms to engage with. So you've got your kind of three traditional areas of media, which is your TV, and I've listed some examples, not all of them, in each category. So you've got your community local TV stations. You'll have your regional TV stations, both BBC and ITV and commercial. And then you'll have national network TV news programs, and then of course other programs, specialist programs that would fit into this category, like Spring Watch, Country File, that kind of thing. In the radio sector, you've got your BBC local stations, your commercial stations. You're not really going to get very far with commercial stations because they're largely just chatter and music these days. Community radio is a fantastic outlet and is a great starting point for a lot of people who are looking for careers in radio. So it's often just run by very passionate volunteers. You've got your hospital radio, which is very hugely valuable platform as well. Commercial network and BBC network radio. And then you've got your traditional print media. So you've got your tabloids, your broadsheets, local press, specialist magazines, and then down to sort of the lowest kind of the community engagement publications like magazines and those fabulous parish newsletters that drop through your letterbox, which these days are quite frankly one of the best ways to get the word out about things. And then these days we have the digital platform, which is quite frankly all of the above and then some. So most of the traditional forms of media are being represented, if not directly, onto digital. Digital platforms are fantastic because they are, I mean, first thing I do in the morning is I switch on my phone and I take a look at the online news. I don't actually switch my radio on. I don't switch my TV on first. Sorry, my ice cream van is just coming into my drive. So sorry if you can hear that in the background. So yeah, digital is absolutely taken off. And what's happening these days is that much of those first three forms of media are being squeezed to feed that fourth form of media. So what you're finding is that TV teams, certainly on a local level, radio teams and print journalism are diminishing, largely because they're not as popular or as used these days as digital because it is so readily available, but because money needs to be found to feed that fourth beast. And it is all consuming because when you think about it, if you think about local regional television, you'll have a team of people working all day to put together a half-hour bulletin in the evening and then, you know, smaller bulletins throughout the day. But that main regional TV moment will be that half-hour programme of an evening. Digital content is ongoing. It's round the clock and they will need to feed that. So they will be constantly looking for content. So what you have now is a situation where TV teams, radio teams and print teams are getting smaller. Resources and money has reduced for those to make way for the digital platforms and the staff needed to run those digital platforms, but everything now is kind of interconnected. So a story that runs on TV, on local TV or local radio, will quite often transfer over to digital. So digital teams, for instance, when I live in Norfolk, and if I look at the Norfolk news page, I know just from the people, because I know the people who are writing those stories, that those stories started on the radio or they started on the TV and then they're being written up. So everything's kind of interconnected. So what you'll find is that because resources and time and money is tight within these teams, it can mean that if you can make it easy for these people to get your story to them and published or on air or broadcast, it can very quickly then be turned around on digital as well. So if you can get in one place, it can often get replicated and turned around and published in lots of different places, which is a fantastic thing. So take, for example, we managed to get some coverage down in Kent, and one interview on the Radio Kent breakfast show was then, well, it's actually 2 interviews across the course of the breakfast show. That was turned around on their social media pages and written up as a digital article. So from one interview, it ended up on 3 separate platforms, because everything is interconnected now. And basically, the easier you can make it for these teams, the more chance you've got of being picked up. So how do we make it easy, essentially? So you've got those, and then you have the 5th estate, which is broadly defined as the increasing influence of non-traditional media voices and outlets on public opinion. The dreaded social media. The dreaded social media, bloggers and vloggers, podcasters, personal websites, user-generated content, essentially, UGC. So we now have a situation where the general public, anybody really, can be a journalist. Anybody can find a story and put themselves on a platform in which they become a journalist. The control of the content and the output is now in the hands of the general public. So what we now have is general public can, through social media and various platforms, post videos, write blogs about their personal opinion. And as we quite often see with things that go viral, personal opinion very quickly becomes fact, and it can spread very, very quickly. I'll go into the pitfalls of that a little bit later, but I will say for now that it is a fantastic platform. My job towards the latter part of my career was to produce the weekend breakfast shows for my radio station. So I was responsible for putting together the Saturday and Sunday breakfast shows. The first thing I did on a Monday morning was I checked out the local Facebook pages in my patch. I looked at the Norwich community Facebook page and I looked at the Norfolk community Facebook page. And then if I couldn't find any particularly interesting stories or anything new that was happening, then I'd delve in deeper and I'd go into the very focused Facebook pages for different market towns and specific areas. I'd look at Twitter feeds. I would go into some of the specialized websites. The Sunday breakfast show was the Faith program. And there's a fantastic website that's been created by the Christian community in Norfolk called Network Norwich and Norfolk. And it's all the content on there is created and written up by members of the Christian community in Norfolk. So it's a fantastic example of members of the public, the average Joe, who has a passion about something, has an interest in something, using these digital platforms to get their stories out there. And then I, as a producer and a journalist, would find those stories and I would then turn them around as content and get those people on a BBC platform. So they can be a fantastic way of getting attention. So many journalists now are so tight on the days of news desks having banks of journalists waiting for the phone to ring for them to spring into action and go and pursue a lead on a story are over. They simply don't exist. In your typical, for instance, BBC local radio station, you probably won't even have a single day reporter. And a day reporter is the person who finds a story and goes out and produces the content on that story. Quite often you will just have newsreaders, program producers, and a digital journalist. So program content will be created, and that might then, if it is deemed newsworthy, make it onto a news bulletin or get picked up by the TV teams or get created, get turned around as a digital article. I know, for example, my local newspaper, I know a marketing team who contacted our local newspaper with a potential story, emailed over some notes about the story with bullet points, expecting that they would just be used as notes, and the journalists at the newspaper would then write their own article about those notes. They published those notes verbatim with the bullet points. They were that short-staffed. They took that email that somebody sent them and they just published it. So it can be really easy, actually, these days to get your stories out there, simply because time and money and resources are tight in so many areas. Okay. So what are journalists looking for? I can only speak for myself here in terms of what I would look for when I was looking for a great story, but I think it does follow across the board, essentially. Most journalists are looking for content that is relevant. It sounds like a really obvious one, but whatever you're offering a media group, it needs to be relevant to their wider audience and their platform. For instance, you wouldn't expect a wildlife magazine to publish an article about air fryers, would you? You know, taking a really ridiculous example. But also the target audience as well can be a little bit harder to ascertain. When you take, for instance, BBC Local Radio into account, their target audience is obviously the community where they're broadcasting. BBC Kent will want stories from people living in Kent. But sometimes knowing the age range and the social demographics of those people can be a little bit harder to ascertain. The bosses would like to think that local radio is for everyone. Actually, statistics show that it's still predominantly people in their mid-40s and upwards who listen to local radio, and that is naturally because as people get older, they're more invested in their local communities. So whoever you are wanting to engage with, make sure that you're not wasting your time in terms of whether or not they would be interested in publishing a story about the Asian Hornet, and whether you as a potential guest or whoever it is who might be willing to do an interview is relevant to the target audience. And a story's got to have a talkability factor. Now, the talkability factor can be something that's just new, something that's unique, something that nobody's heard of before, something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. More than anything, I would say is it's something that's timely. If you can frame the Asian Hornet fight in terms of something that it mattering to something that's already within the public consciousness, then it's more likely to be picked up. So take, for example, the post office scandal. I've read numerous articles linked to what it's like to be an employee of the post office recently, because people are interested in that. They're interested in the life experiences of those people who did those jobs. Same with things like conflicts around the world. Take, for example, this Netflix program, Baby Reindeer, that's just, you know, gone mad over the last couple of days. I've now seen a couple of articles popping up about, you know, what it's like to be the victim of stalking and how to deal with trauma and that kind of thing. So is it something that is already within the public consciousness, which I would say this very much is, because there has been for some time now a discourse and discussion and concerns around environmental issues and climate change. And this is an example of the consequences of something that we have been warned about for some time now. So I think it very much fits into that mold. Journalists are looking for something that puts them ahead of the game. Everybody wants the scoop. Everybody wants the story ahead of their rivals. So what that might mean is if you want to engage with the media and they want to do an interview now before somebody else picks up on it, it might just mean having to find a way to be able to engage with them and be flexible and sort of answer their requests and demands as quick as possible, really. As soon as a media group thinks it's been pipped to the post, it kind of loses interest a little bit. And much what I discussed in the slide before, what makes life easy for them. You know, if an email dropped into my inbox with a fantastic story that was unique to my patch that I hadn't heard of before, and somebody was telling me that there was somebody available for interview, and all I had to do was pick up the phone and they could do an interview with me, boom, done. Easy. If, however, I get a really vague email going, I've got something that might work, we might be able to do an interview, but I'm on holiday for the next couple of weeks, so can we talk about this a bit later down the line? It's already out of my head. So time and money is tight, resources are tight, and it's a rolling, especially with digital these days, there's such a rolling need for content and stories and ideas that actually the easier you can make it for journalists to engage with you, and to get that content to the public, then the more likely your chance of success. So the best stories. The best stories are relevant in terms of relevant to the target audience, relevant to individuals. Are you reaching the target audience for the platform and the subject matter? And why should the public care about the story? Now, one of the biggest challenges, I think, about getting the media to engage on this story is getting past this idea that this is the Asian Hornet incursion is just a problem for beekeepers, or even just an environmental problem. I hate to say this because it's something that everybody should be concerned about, but there is still a bit of a sticking their heads in the sand moment with a lot of people when it comes to the environment. So the best stories are relevant to the most amount of people. This absolutely is, but it needs to be framed in terms of the impact to the wider public, and not just the impact to them, but their capacity to make a difference as well, if they have the capacity to make a difference. And I think that's what makes this something the media should be engaging in, is because we are issuing a direct call to the public to make a difference with this. And that ticks an awful lot of boxes for an awful lot of media groups, especially on a local and community level. And I would say, if you are in the media, don't go to any national applications, don't go to any, this, that, and other. But I would focus your attentions on a community level first, largely because community media has two remits, essentially. One is to provide interesting and engaging and informative content for its readers. It needs to get listening figures, or it needs to sell magazines, or it needs to maximize clicks. That's its goal. But it also does have a duty to represent and serve its communities. So if you are a beekeeping association in a certain patch and you're going to your local media and saying, I've got a story about this, it's a really big deal, but this is what we're doing on a local level to tackle it, and this is what we need from local people to help us tackle it, I think that's a real win-win situation for local media. So I would always say, they're always going to choose stories in their local patch over anything else. So you've got much less competition if you go to local media than you have if you, say, try to approach, I don't know, the One Show or something like that. We are going to try and approach the One Show, but absolutely just go for those local platforms. And also because a lot of those local stories often get picked up by the bigger national network platforms anyway, because they're looking for great content and they're scouring. And I know for a fact that stories that turn up on local BBC platforms will get picked up by network if they're considered good enough stories. So stories, what makes best stories? Stories that are relatable. Individuals need to feel that they identify with the issues being raised. If you are intending to engage with local media, your beekeepers, you're all really experienced and knowledgeable about beekeeping. Most of the general public aren't going to be. So whatever you say, whatever language you use, has to be identifiable with your average non-beekeeper, essentially. So we need to frame it in language that they can connect with. And is it researched? So it seems really obvious, but if you're going to the media with facts and statistics that are incorrect or even questionable, it can cause real problems. So if you can quote some statistics, if you can use some examples from areas that have faced difficulties with the Asian Hornet so far, you can take examples from what our friends down in Kent have been going through, what our friends in Jersey have been going through, what's been going on in Europe. That's a great way, if they can get a headline out of, let's just say, however many more nests there were last year down in Kent, when they like to get a headline out of it. And statistics, especially if they're as shocking as the increase that we saw last year, can be a great way of them going, oh yeah, that's a great story, but they've got to be right, because your story will fall flat. And any good relations that you might have built up with those people, if in any way they have to question what you've told them, then it could cause a problem. Unfortunately, as we've discovered lately, some certain tabloid newspapers can care less actually about correct information. And that's something to really look out for. And that's why I would say always engage on a local level, because I would say most local journalists are pretty straight people. They want to do a good job. They want to represent their local communities. They aren't necessarily facing the same level of scrutiny or pressure that your tabloid journalists are. And they're not necessarily seeking a sensationalist headline. Everybody wants, every journalist wants an engaging headline. They want a story that catches people's attention, yes. But we've had real issues lately with one particular tabloid journalist who had absolutely no respect for the truth whatsoever, and directly fabricated quotes and figures and statistics. So that's just something to be really careful about. If you are want to engage with the media, be sure that whatever you're giving them is correct, because if they do then twist it and make it out to be something entirely different, at least you know that what you've given them was accurate. Okay. So if you want to put yourself out there and you're hoping to get some traction with media in your area, what's the best way to get their attention? First thing I would say is pitch to the right person. Generic news desk emails every single day get overloaded with pitches from PR companies selling them stories about wonder cures for ailments and best-selling brands of peanut butter. I don't know, the most ridiculous stories drop into inboxes, and you just get used to delete. Those generic news desk email addresses perhaps aren't always the best way to go. If you can, and if you have the time, it's always best to see if you can find a name or try and find the contact address for a particular department or program. So for instance, if you want to target BBC local radio, the best bet is probably your breakfast team. If you know who the presenter of your breakfast show is on your BBC local radio, look them up on social media. Chances are they've got a Twitter account. Sorry, it's X these days, isn't it? Chances are they've got social media accounts and you can direct message them. What you'll often find in local media is presenters are often presenter producers. On national and network platforms, you quite often have show and go presenters who aren't necessarily producers, and don't necessarily have any control or care really over the stories that they are dealing with. That's another reason why I would say to go into local, because you have small teams of people who are often doing kind of more than one job at once. So if you can find the right person to pitch to, find out who the news editor on a news desk is, and send them a direct email. You can sometimes actually look up email formats for certain places, rather than just going to the generic company address or whatever. So if you know the email format for a particular platform is first name dot second name at itv.co.uk, for example, and you found out that the news editor is such and such, then you can, put two and two together and find the right email address. It sounds really convoluted, but you can get through to the right person doing it sometimes that way. Approach directly on social media. Like I say, most journalists will be on social media because these days that's often where they find the majority of their stories. So they will quite often reach out to them. Or if you're not sure who the right person is, look up the reception number, the generic contact number for your local media outlet, and ask who it is. Ask for a name. They're not going to withhold that if it means they're getting stories. If you can, include a press release with a summary of the story and why it's relevant for publication now. If you can say in that, it's a very quick and easy way of going, this is what our story is, this is why we think it's important. And if you can put at the bottom, we have people available for interview, give us a call on ... They know that there are people who are willing to be interviewed. It sounds crazy, but there are people who send out press releases and put a contact number in, and then when you ring them and go, great, can I arrange an interview for this before the weekend? They go, oh, well, yeah, we didn't really want to talk about it. you send a press release out, but you don't actually want to talk about the story. Yeah, we're a bit microphone shy. We don't really want to talk to the media, but can you cover the story anyway? If there isn't somebody to talk to, no, actually. So include a press release. Always put contacts on there. If you have, I know I've spoken to some associations, and I know there are some who are going, I'm trying to find some people who will talk to the media. I think I've got a few. I spoke to somebody today who just went, oh, we've got loads of people who want to talk to the media. They love the sound of their own voices. So I know kind of feelings differ about, and it's different in different places. But if there are people who have said, yes, I can be interviewed, and yes, I can make myself available at short notice, should that be needed, then put that on the bottom of the press release. If a journalist or a producer knows there's somebody available, then they can go to them, and you'll have a greater chance of that story being picked up. That goes into that sort of third point there. Be prepared, be ready with potential interviews, do a bit of asking around, see if there's anyone who's willing to talk. Try and be flexible with media requests. Some journalists are literally working on less than 24 hours notice to get a story out there. It wouldn't be unheard of for a journalist to get in touch and say, we need to send a reporter out this afternoon because we want it to be on our breakfast show tomorrow morning. Or can you make yourself available at 7:15 tomorrow? We want to send a reporter out. Can you be standing next to a hive at 7:15 in the morning? And it sounds like they're being really demanding and really unreasonable, but they're literally just working on that shorter timeline because they've got so many slots to fill and so few people these days to fill them. So the more flexible you can be, the better. If you literally can't make it and be available to stand next to your hive at 7:15 in the morning, see if you can offer an alternative solution. If you've got a journalist on the phone going, we really want to cover this on our breakfast show tomorrow morning, can we do it live? Can you be there? Go, well, no, but I might be able to do a pre-record this afternoon. And then they still get that slot filled for the next morning. It might not be an ideal solution for them, but it is something. So if you can't fulfill their requests, if you can offer an alternative, then they might still be able to cover the story. Essentially, how can you solve the problem for the media? And they need you as much as you need them. They really, really do. They are desperate for good stories. They are desperate for content, and they are desperate for something they can turn around quickly. So we've got a press release that's ready to go. We've got a fact sheet. There are two versions of the fact sheet. One that was put together because I was getting requests from people who were thinking about trying to engage with the media and wanted to make sure that they had all the basics in front of them, like a crib sheet they could use, while doing a live interview. So we put that together, and then there's a media version which basically just has an added line on it saying, if you're going to publish this story, please make sure you use the correct image, because we've had an awful lot of the wrong pictures included in magazines and papers as well. So they're available, and they can just be very easily attached to an email when you get in touch with the news desk, and used during interviews as well. And they are really the basics and the basic points we want to get across. So they're already there and ready to go, basically, if you did want a press release. But the easier you can make it to help media platforms create content and hit their targets, the more likely the chance of success. Which brings us to the Asian Hornet. And I think if I was a journalist and a local journalist and a local BKA got in touch with me and dropped this in my lap, I would jump at it. I think local media platforms should be all over this story for a number of reasons. It is relevant to the current awareness of and the concerns around the environment. To many people, it will be new. There's still a phenomenal amount of people out there who don't know about this, and they don't know why they should be concerned about it or why they need to take action. And therefore, it has a talkability factor. It requires public engagement. Anything that actively engages the general public is a dream, I think, for local media teams. It's a direct call to action to get involved. There's now plenty of researched evidence. We've seen what's happened in France. We know what they're doing, and elsewhere. We know what they're doing in Jersey. There's plenty of examples that we can use as to what the implications of this will be if allowed to become established here. So there's lots of examples that can be drawn on it to prove, you know, what we're looking at here. And content's easy to create. We have tens of thousands of members across the country. So if they're happy to talk to the media and willing to engage, there's plenty of people who could be available to be interviewed. So you've got to the stage where you've got some media action going on, and you've got a journalist on the phone going, will you do an interview? And you've gone, yeah, why not? It'll be fine. So just a few interview tips, because the amount of time you have and the circumstances under which your interview take place could differ an awful lot. Taking, for example, you know, what I know about local radio, if you were doing a live interview on the breakfast show, you could be looking at no more than 3 to 4.5, 5 minutes. To some people, that sounds like a long time. To others, it's like, oh, it's nothing. I can't get everything across that I want to in that time. If you are just giving some sound bites for, say, the news bulletins, chances are you're probably only going to have 30 seconds on air, if that. Actually, most radio bulletin clips will be about 20 seconds, no more. And they will be taken out from a longer interview. If you are taking part in a specialist program, for example, I know some people have been asked to get involved in their local gardening programs or podcast or something, you could have as long as 10 minutes, 20 minutes, possibly even longer. So knowing sort of what you're doing and the platform and the circumstances under which your involvement will be published and broadcast is key. If you're giving an interview to a paper, for example, a journalist will probably turn up with a little recording device. They will possibly record anywhere between about, I would imagine, 5 and 10 minutes, and they will cherry pick out of that the bits that they need for their article. So if you get the option to do a live interview, it sounds terrifying, but I would always choose it over pre-recorded, because you have control over what you say then. As soon as you give a pre-recorded interview, whether it be for broadcast later or for print purposes, then you are giving editorial control of what you have said over to the journalist. Same as if you provide a statement. I provided a statement on behalf of Diane to a magazine this week, and they literally printed half of it. And they printed the half that was the least important in my mind. Didn't get the point across what we were trying to say at all. They had complete control over that because it was information given in advance. If it is an interview pre-recorded in advance, you'll probably record about, if I was pre-recording an interview, I'd record about 10 minutes, down to about 4, because I could pick out the bits that are the most engaging and the most interesting. So live interviews can sound terrifying, and they can be really inconvenient because you're probably going to be asked to do them at a time of day when you'd rather be tucked up in bed, but you do have control over what you say. The downside of that is you've got to use your time wisely in that live interview and make the most of the time you have. So just a few tips. I would just say every single time, if you're about to do a live interview, just be yourself. So many people worry unnecessarily about accents, about ums and ers, interjections, pauses. The amount of people who on BBC Radio Norfolk would worry because they had a Scottish accent. And I'd have to say to them, no, it's wonderful. We've got loads of Norfolk people. It's really lovely to hear a Scottish person, or, you know, not realising that there are people on Radio Norfolk that have accents from up north, and there's a Welsh guy, and, you know, we move around a lot, and, you know, we're a global community. So don't worry about that. Be yourself. Keep it natural. Keep it conversational. Don't worry about interjections or pauses. Trust your interviewer. Let them set the pace and take control. A lot of people think if they do a live interview, they're literally, the microphone is going to be put in their face and they literally have to give a monologue. It is to lead you, to set the pace and take control. It is their job to keep it going. Be honest, try and answer truthfully. It doesn't matter if you don't know the answer, just say it's their job to move it on. Be concise, stick to answering the question and keep it tight. If you have a 3.5-minute slot and the first question is, so how did you get into beekeeping? And you give a 2-minute monologue about your history with how you got into keeping bees and what you love about it, you haven't got a lot of time to talk about the Asian Hornet. And they've got their set times, and there are junctions that need to be met, and there are news bulletins and weather bulletins and travel bulletins, and the same applies for if you're doing live television. You will have a set amount of time. Don't waste it on overindulging in one particular answer. Keep it concise, answer the question, and then let them move on. And the one thing I would say is be prepared, but don't script anything. For any kind of interview you do, don't script it. Don't be tempted to write out your answers because it sounds absolutely awful. Have important details to hand. We've put together those fact sheets. They've got concise bullet points about the main things, the main points, the main issues about the Asian Hornet. Your own experience and your own expertise are enough to keep it conversational. Don't try and script answers because you don't know where a live interview will go. And quite often a reporter will pick up on something you've said and take it in a different direction. And if you've scripted your answers on the basis of what you think you're going to be asked, then it could all go horribly wrong. So things to consider: the platform you're engaging with. Different media outlets will have different agendas, aims. That sort of is to do with, I think, local media being a good way to go. A tabloid newspaper will have a very different agenda with the Asian Hornet issue as, say, the BBC down in Surrey or Hampshire. Think about how the interview was arranged, who booked it, have you spoken to the interviewer directly, was it booked through a third party, did you book through a producer, or have you spoken directly to the person who's going to be doing the interview? There are sometimes cross wires and communications, and if there's a producer booking an interview and a presenter doing the interview who hasn't been involved in that booking process, sometimes they might not quite know what the story is or what your angle is. So just bear those things in mind, make it sure that you know the angle that they want to take with it and vice versa, so you all know that you're on the same page. And if you're not sure, just ask them. Just say, what do you want? Where are you hoping to go with this? Because this is what we'd want to get out of it. Is that what you want? To save any confusion later. And think about what you want to achieve. Is it a situation that you feel comfortable with and that will help you achieve your objectives? You know, there's a message we want to get out there, that we want the public to help us with this. And if you feel at any stage that that doesn't align with what they're after, which we've seen a little bit lately, we've been caught out a little bit with some tabloid journalists who told us they wanted to be sensationalists, but actually were a little bit sneaky about the way they went about it, and were caught out. So if at any stage you feel that it's not a situation you feel comfortable with, or you feel that they're not quite on board with what you're trying to achieve, then don't do it, because it might just be counterproductive, to be perfectly honest, than doing it in the first place. What makes a great interview? For me, personally, somebody who's engaging, conversational. I'd rather have a good, lively, engaging chat with somebody who tells me a few things than somebody who's quite boring and a bit sort of just regurgitating facts and statistics at me, tells me lots of stuff, but isn't particularly interesting in it. If journalists feels interested in the audience, he'll just cut the interview short. Or if you've pre-recorded something, he'll just use 30 seconds in it for a news clip of perhaps 10 minutes of recorded stuff. So keep it light, keep it conversational, be engaging, be honest, relax, keep it conversational, be relatable. Don't worry about getting things wrong. Some of the best moments when doing interviews happen when people slip up and make mistakes and have a good laugh about it, and just be yourselves, basically. So the fifth estate, coming back to this one, those are just some kind of ideas about, if you did want to engage with your traditional forms of media, how to go about it and what to expect. The fifth estate is something else entirely. Social media and user-generated content. It is a fantastic platform, as I said earlier on. But there are pros, there are lots of pros, and there are lots of cons. And sometimes the downsides are often for the same reasons that there are upsides. The upside is that it allows anyone to become a journalist and share a story online. You could create your own website tonight and put lots of information about the Asian Hornet on there, and then create an X account or a Facebook account for yourself and do the same thing there. And, you could very easily get some traction on it. Anyone can do that. You don't have to be a traditional, officially trained journalist to do that. It provides a wider platform than traditional media. Its reach and scope is endless, really. Everybody has a phone pretty much these days. The amount of people that walk into a shop and actually buy a newspaper, some people do. A lot of people just get their news on digital platforms these days. It means that you can control the narrative and the messaging. If you are going to use a digital platform and social media to engage on this, journalists will use social media to find stories, absolutely, all the time. And it provides opportunity for engagement and conversation around issues as well. If you were to create your own content and put it online, somebody can respond to it, somebody can reply, you can have a back and forth about it, you can have a conversation about it. And if an article is published on one of these platforms, it does mean that redactions can occur quickly. And we've seen that when we've had to get in touch with some newspapers and say, you've used a picture of a European hornet again. Can you get it right this time? Or you've misquoted this. Can you get it right? The digital versions can be changed just like that. Print, okay, it's tomorrow's chip shop paper, but it can't be changed quite as easily. Digital versions can. The cons, though, anyone can post online. For the same reason it's a benefit, it's also a problem. There is the potential for misinformation, misleading, damaging comments. Opinion can very quickly become fact. We see stories that take off and untruths that are just very quickly embedded in the public consciousness and considered to be absolute truth, and they're not. And what you'll have is, journalists get a bad rap a lot of the time, and for good reason sometimes. Some of them are pretty unscrupulous and some of them are really demanding. But what a lot of them, or most of them, should have is a good understanding of media law, of defamation, of data protection compliance, of image copyright, all of those things that the general public quite a lot of the time don't have. The amount of times that you see people defamed on social media is incredible. You have to be very, very careful about what you're saying. It's unlikely to happen when we're talking about the Asian Hornet, but it's just worth remembering. Misinformation can spread very, very quickly and becomes viral. And articles and posts, even though they can be quickly corrected, they are often duplicated. So what you'll have is media groups that own lots of different digital publications, and one article will then be syndicated across all of them. And then you'll find other media groups picking up on those articles and pretty much copying exactly what's been said. So whilst things can be corrected quickly, they can also spread very, very quickly, very far and very wide. So it's a brilliant tool, but use it wisely, essentially. And if you're ever kind of unsure, then just ask and get in touch, basically. And we can help with that. So the Asian Hornet is the perfect story, but what is the message that we want to get across? And I think it's fairly obvious to most people, and I think it's what certainly I've been hearing most people want the narrative to be on this going forward. And that is the feeling that up until now it's been viewed largely as a beekeeping problem, and therefore getting the public on board has been a little bit challenging, maybe. So I think the key points, if you are going to get in touch with the media, if you are willing to do interviews, if you do want to speak to them, this is one to get. It's very well for beekeepers. if we are to see the kind of establishments that we've seen in France and elsewhere, then this is going to affect pretty much every single sector of society. Some associations had asked for a list of groups that needed contacting within their community, whether it be to ask for help, whether it be to warn them about the potential presence of hornets. So I created a list of stakeholders that I thought were the most influential and useful in terms of getting on board. And when you start looking at it, pretty much every sector of society can and will be affected. So this is a problem for everyone. And we don't want to scare people. We want to get the message across that the power is within the hands of the public to do something about this. And everybody, I think, will be affected in some way. The ecological impacts will be far-reaching. This is just about hammering home that point again about the importance of pollinators, really, in terms of the wider ecology, and even, you know, the very security of our own food chain going forward. The Asian hornet does pose a risk to public health. We don't want to scaremonger, but we do know that these things can be aggressive. So, and I think are inherently selfish, and unless it directly affects or negatively impacts them, they're perhaps not quite as keen to pay attention. And I don't think it hurts to go, actually, we have seen elsewhere, we do know this about them, this about their behaviour, we do know they can react aggressively. There could be any number of situations where people could be harmed, or at least find themselves in a situation where something could happen. And I think that will make people sit up and take notice, but we do have to be careful not to just, you know, go down the line of the Sun newspaper of last week who said there are plagues of killer hornets on the way. You know, we're not going to be doing that, obviously. But it doesn't hurt to kind of say, yes, there is a risk to public health. This is now a public health issue as well. Hard to eradicate once it's established. Essentially, we have a frame. We have a window of opportunity to do something about this. And sort of skipping over a point, prevention now, taking action now, is better than having to take extensive measures and throw lots of money at this later, which is exactly what's happening in France now. Haven't really got a handle of this for years, and they're now having to come up with a national plan to tackle it, because, you know, the cost implications are spiraling for them, it would appear. So they've now published a national plan of action. You know, that's what we need to be doing now, and we need the public on board to help take action. The economic costs of this could be substantial, essentially. And, you know, the public have the power to make a huge difference. That's all we're asking them to do. We're not asking them to do anything other than know what they're looking for, keep an eye out, download an app. That's all we're asking. Familiarise yourself with what the Asian hornet looks like. Keep an eye out as you're going about your business. And if you think you see one, take a picture, log it on the app. It's 3 simple steps, and it's very easy to do. So I think that's the key message. That's all we're asking the public to do. It's something quite simple, but it could make a huge difference. So the public have the power with this. And that's what I think makes it a really good story for the media to engage with. Okay, I've had a couple of people say to me and reach out and say, you going to do anything about image copyright? Because obviously, you know, we're putting posts out and we're making posters and we're creating PowerPoints and we're going to be at shows and we want to use this image and that image. And what does the law say around that? I'm not an expert on this. I know the basics, and my knowledge goes about so far as to say, if I want to use an image, I need to find out who the copyright belongs to, and I need to credit that person. That is it's quite a complicated issue. So I've kind of outlined the basics here, and I have sought advice from other people within the BBKA who know more about this than I do. The basics are that the copyright belongs to the owner of the image, essentially, and you can't just use an image without the permission of the owner. Now, the owner is usually the person who created the image, usually, i.e. the person who took the image but not always. So for instance, if a journalist might work for a particular media group and takes a picture to publish alongside a story he's writing, it may well be that that image belongs to the media group and not the person who took it. So there can be some, complexities around that. Permission from the owner must be sought before the image is used. Extremely costly, and it can very easily occur, particularly on digital platforms. So always check. And if you're not quite a lot of requests and queries about image copyright, which I've taken a bit of time to look into, and it's quite certain. And sometimes it's meant me going directly to the person who took it, and it's quite often been somebody on Jersey or on the Isle of Wight, because they're that much further down the line, and I've just gone, do we have permission to use this with the credit for yourselves? Yep, no problem. And they've been quite clear about how and when we can use it. There are other complexities around. You may well get an image, permission to use an image for one purpose, and I think I'm right in saying this. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can then use it or duplicate it in other ways in other areas. So essentially, take a look at the government website. Just put in the search engine on the government website, image copyright, and there's loads of information on there. And if you're not sure, just get in touch with me and I'll be able to ask somebody who knows or find out and let you know for certain. So that's it, basically. Does anybody have any questions, or is there anything? Like I say, I'm going to be sort of talking from my own personal experience and what would have interested me if I'd seen it as a story. So what I was looking out for, what I would have picked, and what I would have put to air, essentially.
Hi there. Can I ask if you can put a call out for people to donate their photographs? We've got some fantastic photographs, and I'm sure that many beekeepers will happily volunteer extensive use of their photographs by BBKA beekeepers for use in all the publicity. There's a lot of great material out there, and some very, very generous people. So we just need to put together a library for access, that's all.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I'll tell you something we do need is high resolution images as well. Yeah. Every single time, I've been kind of just reaching out to as many different publications as I can possibly think of, and every single one comes back and says high res images. And this is all quite new to me because I've never worked in print media before, so I'm kind of like, okay, right, I think I know what high res, or I'll send some images over that I know I can, and I'm like, okay, they're not quite good enough. So yeah, we really need some high res images. That's a really good idea, and I'm sure that we can I'm sure that we can very easily have we've already got a section on the website, I think, haven't we, that has images on it, but we do need to put a call out to those areas. I meant to speak to Jersey, actually, to John Carteret, to say, and he's already sent over quite a lot of images already from what they've been doing this year, but I can certainly put a call out to specific people, and more generally, that would be great. And if we can get around copyright by just saying, can you donate images that you are happy to be used, and then as far as I'm aware, we get around the copyright issue if we got permission to use them freely. So yeah, I think that is a great idea. Sorry, I've just seen there's some questions coming on the chat screen.
They are mostly about photos. I've put the BBK email in the chat, and we'll make that more available, where people can email in photos and they'll get an auto response saying, we need you to confirm you're giving us a copyright for whatever thing. So we've got a system in place. We do have some photos, but you're right, we need more. Yeah,
and we really need those high res images as well if we're going to get just to have, we could do with a bank that we can just go, here you go. Somebody has asked if there was a crib sheet that we can use for the media. Yeah, we do have that media fact sheet. It is essentially the same as the fact sheet we put together. It literally just has a disclaimer on saying, please make sure you use, it's got some images on it, please make sure you use the right images, because misidentification could be, you know, really problematic actually. Yeah, so but if anybody does want me to send that to them directly, I think the main fact sheet is on the website, but the media one isn't, that has that little bit extra on it. So just email me and I'll send it over. That's absolutely fine. Hi Sandra, you're next on my screen. So I didn't know if your question was the same as the one you put on the chat, was it?
Yeah, but I've also got another idea. So we're near Poole Port, and we've also got Weymouth that had an issue. And the Barfleur has had 2 sightings of a hornet coming over on the ferry. And I'm just wondering if a headline along the lines of "Don't bring home a hornet from your holiday" would grab your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an absolute sucker for alliteration. Anything that rhymes or alliteration. Yeah, and I would say that when you're something I didn't mention is that if you can, when you do email through, if you do want to say, come up with that headline, and you know, you're thinking that that's really catchy, I want to, you know, you've literally written the headline for them, you know, that they should lap it up. If you were to then kind of send that out, try and make it as personal as possible in your subject header at the top of your email. Sort of, I wouldn't put that in the main body of the subject because it sounds like it sounds like your marketing company trying to sell something. And they'll just delete. They'll, you know, because so many of those come through every single day. That's a great headline, but I would make it clear in your subject header. Sorry, which area were you, Sandra? Did you say you're?
We're down in Poole in Dorset. I just wondered if anybody from Kent that is communicating about Folkestone Harbour or anywhere around the country at the south at the moment that are dealing with ferry ports might want to get in touch with East Dorset Beekeeping, and I will chat to them in terms of you know, how they're tackling communication with ferry ports and people identifying hornets that potentially are coming in into people's gardens and nearby.
Yeah, I have been working on ferry terminals and ports. Obviously I haven't had the time to, well, no, in some instances I have, I went on an association level. I think I did the Port Association, and I think there's another one, Ports of Britain or something like that. And they have responded saying they'll sort of pass information on and everything. But yeah, then it comes down to sort of engaging on that local level. Just going back to your subject header, I would say I would make it clear you are a person emailing and not a marketing company. So something like Dorset beekeepers urge public to help out with the Asian Hornet or something, or even just you know, would you be interested in this story? If you sound like you're trying to sell something, it can come across as one of those awful marketing companies who usually have a Z-list celebrity trying to sell something, and most local media certainly are just not going to touch you with a barge pole. So try and make it as local and as personal as you can. And if it comes from actually a personal email account, they're probably more likely to look at it than if it comes from what looks like a company or an association email account. If it comes from an actual person, it will stick out as being something personalized rather than commercial, so to speak. Hi, Jules.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Hi.
As somebody who's done a little bit of this stuff in Kent lately,
Yep.
A couple of practicalities. If you're going to be on the TV, they'll want photos of the location before the interview. Make sure you've got at least 4G, preferably 5, and they will use your phone as the camera. It is extremely difficult to hold it at arm's length in shot and speak at the same time. So if you can have some form of tripod or another person.
Yeah.
Local radio is great because a really nice chap in a little tiny van with a dish on the top turns up.
Yep.
And
which are actually less reliable than the old vehicles which had satellites that you used to have to stand there and hold the button and watch the mast go up like that. and they, because the mast was so tall, they actually got a better signal than the new sat dish ones, where you can't be positioned between two buildings because you can't get a satellite signal. So I don't know, but it's modern technology, isn't it?
Yeah, they do about 500 revolutions before they find something. But the thing with the radio interview, he's usually with you for at least an hour because he'll do 2 live interviews.
Yeah.
So, and they're very personable chaps.
Yeah.
And they like the story. And if you explain the situation, they'll actually give you a little bit of coaching on what parts of the topic they'd like to cover, which is nice. And the other thing is they will expect you to be in a bee suit.
Yeah. So the thing about local radio, I mean, I worked for local radio for 25 years, so in fact, I still think it very much has a place. Actually, I think it's the one form of media that's happening on a local level that other media aren't doing. Nothing else is replicating it. So I still think it's really important. But as money is tight and the license fee has to stretch over lots of different places, what's happened with local radio programs is some of them used to be 2 hours long, some of them used to be 3 hours long, and each station would have autonomy over how it planned its programs. A couple of years ago, actually, it was during COVID, they came up with the rule that all programs had to be 4 hours long. So what you now have is teams of people who previously only had to fill 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. They're the same groups of people, possibly even less. You might have less people working in those teams now, having to fill 4 hours. That's a heck of a lot more content to find. So what they'll often do, like you've just mentioned, is if they come across a story, they'll give it treatment twice, sometimes 3 times in the same program. If they're going to go to the effort to send a journalist out on location, they're not going to bother to send a car out and pay for fuel and, traveling time and all of that if they're just going to get a 5-minute hit out of it. You'll probably get 2 hits, you'll probably get 3. And if you can give them the time, like I know you did, you were there for quite a while that morning, and you're willing to do that, and that moment, that story went out on their socials and it got written up as an online article. And that's, just because that's the way it works now. And it's largely through cutbacks and lack of resources, basically. But it's beneficial for those wanting the coverage because you can get a lot more coverage out of one story if it's a good story. So yeah, if you're willing to give them the time and be flexible with them, you can get an awful lot. I mean, when I first started out in local radio, the breakfast show was 2 hours long and a story would happen once and there'd just be a different story every time. And you'd probably have about 15 different subjects covered within the space of a 2-hour program. It would cover all the local news, but only once. The general thinking nowadays is that listening habits have changed. People don't sit down and listen to a radio program in full anymore. They dip in and out. They're traveling to work. They've got one eye on the telly. They're at work. They're making dinner for the kids. So they were dipping in and out. There's so many channels now. You've got DAB, you've got digital, you've got all these different platforms and all these different bits of content competing for attention, that people's listening habits, there are still some who'll sit down and watch a whole story lots of times, because somebody who's listening at 7 o'clock won't be listening at 8 o'clock. Somebody different will be listening at 8 o'clock and somebody else will be listening at 9:30. So the treatment will happen 2-3 times, which is great because it means that you're getting it out there that many times. But it can mean that you have to dedicate quite a lot of time to doing interviews.
I'm just a semi bee farmer. I've got 30 odd hives, and I'm a builder. I've never done any kind of speaking at all. And if I can do it, anybody can.
You don't
I can
need
do
to
it. Anybody can.
That's the thing. You don't need to be a great speaker. You just need to be a great conversationalist, and most people are. The worst thing you can do is come in with a load of notes and somebody asks a question and you read off a piece of paper. It's I want to have a conversation. People want to hear a conversation happen. And they want to hear normal people. And that's why I think local media is a good way in, because people want to hear from the people in their street. They want to hear from the people in their community. They want to hear from normal people just like them. They want to be able to put themselves in those people's shoes.
Yeah.
Whereas I think on a national level, and to be perfectly honest with you, national media is quite often light years behind what local has done, because the local journalists are quite often the first ones to the stories on the ground, and what might turn up on, I don't know, I keep referring to the One Show or This Morning, those magazine programs, has probably been done by a local journalist months prior. They're usually the first ones to the story.
I was very comfortable with local radio. I can't say I was comfortable with Kay Burley.
No, and that's a case in point. That's a classic case of somebody. That's a classic case of a story that had an agenda, not agenda.
Her own agenda.
She had a narrative. She had a narrative that she wanted it to fit in, and that's where the two types of media were different. I mean, when you think about it, when you think about what Sky News is dealing with, or BBC News, rolling news, they're talking about the big stories. It's very fast rolling, and they're going to want it to come across as a big story. Whereas local media will be more interested in what the community is doing and how the community is engaging on a story. And that's quite often the difference. I mean, just to pick up on the point that you made about, TV journalists coming out with a phone, you don't, from what I can see, is there's generally a shift towards not having radio journalists. What you now have are multimedia journalists. There are still radio journalists and there are still TV journalists, but whereas you used to have a reporter going out with a guy with a camera and a big boom on a stick, and it would be a team of 3, nowadays it'll be a one guy with his phone, basically. So which makes it a lot less intimidating, I think. So a lot has changed.
It is effective. I was on Sky News in September, and a lady in London saw it, and they found the nest in Hackney 3 hours later.
Yeah.
So it's effective. It does work.
Yeah. Angus has just put something up on chat screen. Radio interviews often via phone using a digital platform. Yeah, you can do WhatsApp, FaceTime, or Zoom on radio now. It's so easy, and the quality is fantastic. It used to be that we were told, try and get people in the studio. And I mean, I live in Norfolk. Norfolk's a pretty big county. It'll take you well over an hour to drive from Norwich to King's Lynn. If I want to do a story with somebody in King's Lynn and my studio is based in Norwich and I'm working on a breakfast show, they're not going to drive in for over an hour at 6 o'clock in the morning to be on the radio. It's not the case anymore. The quality is such with WhatsApp and that kind of thing that you can literally do it from home. And the stipulations on where you need to be as well have just relaxed so much more because the equipment is so much better. So it just opens up that it makes it easier than ever, I think, to get yourself on air. Hi, sorry, Jerry. You've been waiting with your hand up for ages.
Yeah, just unmute myself. Well, Kirsten, thank you ever so much for your inputs. It's been very enlightening. I'm from Torbay, and I'm the chairman of Devon AHAT. And you may recall that I sent you and also Lee Sidaway a press release that I put to the newsrooms about 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the key point of this one was for the public to get on board to assist beekeepers because of the increase in incursions that we had last year, which was very, very worrying indeed.
Yeah.
And so the key point was to look for primary nests, that we wanted them to look in garages, under eaves and other places. And very, very frustrated. I put that to the newsrooms, and of course, as you said earlier during your presentation, that they pick out what they want to actually publish. And this is so frustrating because that message, that key message, which was so important, didn't get out to all of the papers. And so I'm having to do a rerun shortly just to make sure that that story gets out, because that's what we want. We need the public to be educated about the Asian Hornet. We want them to know what it is. and what it's not, and
Yeah.
also for them to look at key points and key things such as the primary nest this time of year. It's so crucial.
Yeah.
Now,
Did they
sorry.
print anything out of interest?
Things have been printed, but the thing
Yeah.
is this, that it's one story locally was that about the number of incursions that was put forward, and also that it's devastating, and the public need to be aware.
Yeah.
And they were then saying that a nest the size of a tennis ball can decimate pollinators. And of course, they got it totally out of context, because
Yeah.
it's a secondary nest that's produced,
Yeah.
which can grow to the size of a beach ball, and you can lose up to 11 kilos of pollinators. And they did sort of bring out the key issue, which was that it's a bigger issue, because it's not just that our pollinators and not just bees, because it was put out initially that it was bees.
Yeah.
That were being affected, and then it's gone, a little bit more wide scale to all pollinators. So your butterflies, your hoverflies, and other things are going to go. But now the message needs to be pushed, and this is what we're trying to achieve, that we get people to understand that we've got birds and other creatures that rely on pollinators and flies and all sorts of things for their survival, and so it is frustrating.
This is one of the biggest issues with this, is that there's a number of levels why this is an important story issue. I don't like to keep referring to stories because it makes it sound like we're just talking about this because it's just for the media. It's not. It's an issue for society. There are a number of, and this is what I'm finding in that sometimes you have to be really focused with the targeting of the messaging, in that there is the public health risk, and then there's the environmental impact. And because of the environmental impact, there's then the cost impact. And the message that you might perhaps go to a local authority with, where you might be going, hey, this is going to be really expensive, might be different to the message that you're going to someone else with. And the problem, which and this is what you've obviously come across here, is that in trying to simplify it, because it's not a simple issue, is it? It's very specific about the time of year. There is a difference between primary nests and secondary nests. But if you were to say to an average person, oh, primary nest and secondary nest, when you're referring to an insect they've never heard of before, they're probably not going to understand it. They'll understand nest, but they won't understand the complexities of the differences in the times of year, where they might be built, what's actually happening in the life cycle of the Asian hornet when each of those nests is being created. So I and this is what often happens in an effort to simplify it or oversimplify it for public consumption, the context is missed. So
you'll probably recall from the press release that I sent you that I gave a photograph and said, this is what we want the public to look for. This time of year, this is what we want them to look for. So it was quite specific, but it is frustrating. I mean, I deal with all press and media for Devon, as far as Asian Hornet is concerned. And I was surprised that one article that we sent out, the very next day, a friend from Philadelphia sent me a news bite, which was from Manhattan, New York Evening Post, and it was so bizarre. They were talking about Jerry Stewart from the UK and Colin Lodge are losing the battle against the Asian Hornet, against the murder hornet, which is Vespa mandarina, and the thing is this. I looked at it and I thought to myself, that bears no resemblance whatsoever to what we publicised and what they picked up. And so they cherry pick, and quite honestly, it really infuriates me.
It is infuriating, and it's one of the problems with this is that quite often, especially with newspapers, I would say, yeah, I'd say it's largely newspapers, and it's largely tabloid papers as well, is that if they can take this angle, then the angle they're naturally going to take is, this is awful, you're going to, do you know what I mean? The murder hornet kind of angle, and they're gonna reduce it right down to the most lowest form of language, if you like, to get people to, if people think they are directly in danger, they will pay attention. If we see something on the news or read a headline in the paper where we think the sky's falling in on us, then we're going to pay to pick up that paper to figure out what it is so that we can keep ourselves safe. So all the while that they can frame this in terms of an invasion of killer hornets, which some are trying to do, then, they will. Conversely, annoyingly, that public health aspect of this is also the aspect that could get people to pay attention the most. So it is really tricky. The only thing I would say is stick to your guns in terms of the message you want to get across. Sometimes it might just be best to kind of, whilst we do have to kind of say to people, we do have to mention the public health element, that actually, if you think the target audience for that publication would be more interested in learning and knowing about the environmental impact, and that's what we're trying to get across, then, be firm in that and be committed to that and go with that.
Well,
it's just a shame.
Okay, Kirsten. Well, now that you're with us, anything that I do in future will go through your office, and
Yeah,
prior
send it
to
to me.
it being sent. And I
Yeah,
just want to.
yeah.
So I'll stop speaking now because there's other people that want to come on. But I'd just like to say to Sandra from East Dorset Beekeepers, could you leave your contact number, please, Sandra, and I'll get in contact with you because obviously
I think she's had to dip out.
Oh,
I
okay,
think she's had to leave already. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, all right,
I think she's
that's
had
no
to go.
problem. Yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah, but I'm sure we can find a way of getting you in touch.
Well, no, the thing is,
I'll see.
Kirsten, I'm already I'll be contacting bordering counties and expanding out from Devon to Dorset and Hampshire, etc. We're trying to get something arranged to have a mutual aid agreement for border working. So I was just wanting to tell her that that's on the cards. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I would just say stick to your guns, and just keep bombarding them, and we know what the correct angle for this is. It does feel like a bit of an uphill battle at times because there are some media platforms that have an agenda and they will look for the stories that fit their agenda. There are other media platforms that are genuinely looking for interesting, informative content that serves their target audience. And it can sometimes, it's not difficult to know which is which because I think we know who the worst offenders are, but it can sometimes be difficult to, weed out the ones that aren't doing their job properly.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Michelle!
Hello.
We've spoken so many times on the phone, but I've never seen you in person.
Well, there you go. Firstly, thank you very much. That was really informative. My message was actually to go via Sandra, but she's dipped out. It was just to say, and for everybody else that's near any port or has a marina nearby, to contact them.
Yeah. So I am working on marinas. I mean, the difficulty that I've got from my situation is that in some cases I can direct. I mean, for example, supermarkets. There aren't that many supermarkets. I can go to them all individually from my position. But when you're looking at things like access points and I'm having to go in on a level up here, either the umbrella organization or the association, and I can't always necessarily go in directly on a local level, although I am trying to do that in areas such as yours that are obviously real problematic areas. But yeah, absolutely. And
it was more for everybody else to be aware locally of
Yeah.
their own marinas and to contact them.
Yeah.
I've had
And-
good feedback from our local marinas.
And to be perfectly honest, sometimes when you're having to pitch to these groups, it's the same as having to pitch to the media, actually, because most businesses, associations, unions, they all have websites, and they've quite often got a news section on their website on which they can publish articles. So they are every website, when you're talking about these places, are often news outlets in their own right. So when you're pitching to them, it's often exactly the same as when you would pitch to a paper or a TV station.
Yeah, our local marinas have their own newsletter that goes to those that actually go in.
They'll have social media channels. They'll be on X. Because especially when you're talking about commercial enterprises, from a digital marketing perspective, you don't really provide great customer service if you're not on social media platforms and responding to people's complaints or concerns or queries. So they have a platform and a mouthpiece in the same way that Twitter accounts belonging to newspapers or ITV or the BBC do. So, absolutely any kind of risk point areas, access routes. They
are really receptive as well. They had no knowledge, which was quite frightening, but are now fully on board, which is really good.
And if anybody does get a positive response from something like that, so a commercial enterprise or whatever, and they say, because I know this happened with you, Michelle, didn't it? Where they said, can you provide us with an article for our website? Because they are actually now news outlets. If you get that and you're like, oh, I haven't got time to write an article or whatever, just honestly, just ping me an email, because I've written a couple of articles which are out there, which people can submit to their, say, parish newsletters or their community magazines or whatever. What we have to be very careful with is duplicate submissions. So I couldn't submit the same article to the Daily Mirror, if you like, as I would to, I don't know, the Times, because they're going to be a bit peed off that somebody has submitted duplicate articles. But those articles can very quickly and very easily be changed. The main body of it, I can tweak them and change them and target them. So, for instance, say, I don't know, the Port Association, I don't even know if it's called that, wanted an article for their website. That article or an article can very easily be tweaked and targeted at that particular audience and that particular group. So just drop me an email, basically, and we can get something sorted. If they're willing to put something on their website, I'd rather get them something, than people worry about what they can provide, essentially. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Kirsten. My point is really aimed at Diane as well. It's your Asian Hornet costume. You gone? Oh boy.
No, I'm here. That might be. What was the question?
I
might be able to answer it, but it might be something for Diane.
The conditions of use are rather onerous, and for Royal Cornwall Show in June, I don't think we can meet them. Is there any way to get a pattern that was made, or has this been done professionally?
It was done professionally, and it cost quite a lot of money. So one of the things we've done is we've actually put the deposit on and asked for it to be collected. It isn't the sort of thing that would post out well, and I suspect going in the back of a van with a courier, it'd end up really quite badly damaged. We've lent stuff out to associations in the past and had stuff back broken and damaged. So we really don't want that to happen with the Asian Hornet costume. We could put you in touch with the lady who made it, if that would help. We have talked about the deposit and the lending conditions today, because we've noticed there was quite a lot of interest and suddenly not so much interest. So we might have to be flexible on that.
I saw your article in the latest BBKA, and it's an interesting costume, but to have to go to Stoneleigh and collect it from Cornwall is going to be a huge ask.
Yeah. There's a number. It's one of those things where when you look into it, isn't it, Diane, the difficulties around it, because obviously I kind of thought, somebody mentioned to me, could it like go on tour? Could we arrange a system where it sort of goes from one association to another and gradually travels its way down the country? But then you've got issues of, well, how does it get cleaned? Because it's going to be pretty disgusting when, 20 different people have used it, and, we want to clean it. So who takes responsibility for that? And then if it does get damaged, well, how do we know who's responsible for it when it's just, and it does become quite complicated. I mean, I think actually the actual body of the costume was really quite cheap to make, wasn't it, Diane? And could be made on a local level. It's the head that's very intricate.
I
Design.
I understand your problems, but I'm just voicing the fact that I had considered it, and I won't be chasing it up.
No, and I know there are a couple of people who have requested, have thought about getting their own made.
Well, we've just made one in Tor Bay. One of our members from there
Wow.
you go, and that's the first prototype of it. And of course, there's some feedback gone to make the legs a little bit blacker, but she's done a really good job. Tracy Frankpitz, Tiverton, that's created that.
Does she have a patent for that, Jerry?
She took the photographs off of what you advertised for
okay.
And so she's just copied it from that.
Okay. So she's a clever lady.
Yeah, the thing is that we were going to hire it, but because you're inflexible with regards to it had to be collection only, you weren't going to courier it. That would mean that it would involve a number of hours for us to drive up, and also the cost implications of petrol. And plus, it was quite frightening that we had to put £500 down, and then there was the sword of Damocles over us that it would be £1,500 if there was any damage to it. And so we thought, oh well, let's just go ahead and make our own one.
Yeah, I think we hear you think, look, we can't say what will happen. I mean, what we don't want is to have an Asian Hornet costume that sits on the shelves.
Yeah,
because that's not doing any favour. So we do understand it, but as Kirsten's pointed out, there are some very good reasons for those things. But we are going to look at it and see if there's anything that can be done. But I don't want that to sound like a promise. That's just like, we hear you, and we'll see. We'll consider.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder if there's something that we can sort of arrange, and it might involve a number of associations getting together and pooling resources or funds or something and getting something made, not necessarily to the same level on the same cost, but the areas where it's probably needed the most are down the south and along the south coast, and that's where we need to raise the most awareness. And yet for those people to travel up and pick it up is difficult, isn't it? So
it is in Kent at the moment.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a tricky one. But it's good that it's popular. It's popular. Michael, your hand is still raised. Was it the same question, or?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't drop my hand.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought it went back up again. Right, I don't think there's any more questions. Oh no, Rod. Hi, Rod.
Hello. Thanks very much for this evening. In my area, I approached my town council to try and get something in the council newsletter that goes around every house. Didn't have any luck, but they let me have notices put up on the community notice board and all around the allotments. But a parish council around here has said they will publish something in their parish magazine. I think the advantage of council and parish magazines, they go into every household in the area.
Yeah, this is exactly. And I would actually say, I would even go so far as to say, I mean, there are those people who pick those things up off their doorstep and put them straight in the bin. But our village parish newsletter, I always have a quick flick through, because there are people I know who've got businesses locally who advertise in there, and the local school says what they're up to and everything. I always have a good read of it. I would actually say, since they go through every single door in the parish, that they might actually be more, beneficial to us than, in some respects, a slightly shoddy article in a tabloid newspaper. And there is a ready to go article that is written. It's been, it went out on email. I don't know if it's on the website yet, but it's ready to go. And there's two different versions. There's one that's very much targeted at the reader, as in, this is what we need you to do. Why is it a concern? Why should you be worried? Here's how you can help. And there's one that's a bit more straight-laced. And that can be submitted to parish newsletters and community magazines. We run into slight difficulties if we're going to start trying to, get bigger publications with bigger platforms to publish the same article, because we can look a bit daft and they might get a bit peed off if we try and we're not asking for payment for it, obviously, but it's not very ethical. But on a community level, just submit it. I think they're really, really useful, actually. And usually the person who puts them together is in your neighbourhood somewhere. So, I think they're a great outlet, really. Well done. And local councils as well. Yeah, local council newsletters. And this is obviously an issue that local councils should be paying attention to. I mean, I've been in touch with Kent County Council and a couple of other local councils on the basis of them being risk points or where there's been recent sightings, just to reiterate the point. And I've been in touch with the National Association of Local Councils as well, which looks after the interests of local and parish councils. But this is absolutely an issue they should be paying attention to. A, because they have the platform to help raise public awareness, and B, because really local councils have a duty to look after the interests of their residents and constituents, don't they? So if you can target their local council, and even if you just ask them to publish an article, and what we've actually put on that article that they've been written is we've actually put general press release at the top of it, so they know that it shouldn't be. Sorry, I've just realised I'm about to run out of charge in my computer. So if my screen, I've put my laptop in another room and it's about to run out of power. So if I go blank any minute, I'm sorry. But yeah, local councils is absolutely the way to go, and they should be paying attention to this. So we put general press release at the top of those articles, so that anybody you put it to knows that it isn't necessarily for publication verbatim. It is a press release, but it is a ready to go article. So they should be able to take some inspiration from it and do their own thing with it pretty easily without it being a problem being duplicated elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do live in the South Coast Port. Yeah. Jules has just said environmental health at your local council. Yeah, that's a good way in. To the extent that we've managed to get a few, hopefully, talks and webinars lined up around Portsmouth Way with their environmental team, which is a work in progress at the moment. But anything that sort of you can do on that level, your environmental team is a good in. Right, I think if there's no more questions, my computer probably is going to die. My laptop's going to die on me. If anybody does have any more questions, just email me, outreach.officer@bbka.org.uk, and I'll be happy to help. And if you've got any worries about media or anything in the future, or just not sure, then just let us know, because like I say, we've got quite a few people on the team who've got experience in that area.
Right, thanks very much, Kirstine.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you, Kirstine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirstine. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
then.
night, Michelle.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night from Jersey.
Oh, don't go, John. I want to ask you something.
Okay.
If you've got a minute. Everyone else, good night. Take the hint or I'll throw you out.
And I'll tell you about the nest we were taking down today.
Oh, they'll all want to stay for that.